we are talking about Proverbs. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Fear to Faith podcast. I'm Jeff Combs,
No, I'm Brendan Turner.
and this week we are talking about Proverbs. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that way you get notified every time we come out with a new video. Be sure to check out the website for the show notes. We're going to have all of the graphics and all of the links that we have to videos and extra content in there. All right, Brennan, what are we talking about this week?
Well, I think thus far on the previous podcast, we've unpacked some heavier items and pulled out a lot of scripture and then the commentaries behind that. But this week we're doing Proverbs, which is super practical, concise, should be very beneficial for you guys. A lot of people will read one proverb a day because it typically runs the length of a month. So and then you just start over the next month. So it's super easy to get your kids involved with. And then we're going to look at a couple of the proverbs here, but a lot of it was attributed to Solomon and then his influence on wisdom and being the wisest man. And so we're going to look at a couple of those proverbs and really unpack it. But it all boils down to the fear of the Lord. And so we're going to look at what that means. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Quick little tangent is when we're recording this, the Grammys was this weekend. And, wife and I like music. And so we subject ourselves to that culture, I guess. But what was interesting is there was a moment where Jelly Roll, he won a Grammy, went up there, and then he spoke, and he had a Bible in his hand, and he was just proclaiming Jesus's name. A lot of times you hear God, just kind of little G God, and then they just leave it at that. But he was clearly saying Jesus Christ, and it was really cool to see on a big stage like that. And so I think there's a humbleness that comes from reading Proverbs where you're accepting God's definition of good and evil rather than creating our own. And so the fear that we need to fear God with is not a fear of hatred or anything like that. It's a reverential awe and submissive trust in God's sovereign holiness, not terror.
There's actually 18 references in Proverbs to the fear of the Lord. And fearing him means acknowledging in our hearts that he's the creator and we're simply the created, right? So you've heard that reference of pottery, right? If you're making a jar, you made the jar, you get to use that jar for whatever you want. So if you're wanting to put flowers in it, then it's a jar that's got flowers in it. If you want that jar to go water plants outside, it's a jar that's going to be out in the garden. It's getting dirty and stuff like, the creator gets to decide what the created is for. That is not for the jar to then turn around and tell us what it is that he wants to be used for. That's not the way that it works. So it means that we respect God for who he is, that we listen to what he says and we obey his word, because disobedience displeases him. Think about somebody that you really respect, that you hold in high regard, and they come to you and they look at you and they just have this stern look on their face, and they just tell you, man, I'm really disappointed in the choices that you're making and the things that you're doing, how that would make us feel.
Yeah, that's good. And we have wisdom, which is not mere human prudence or cleverness, but a God-centered orientation that acknowledges divine authority over all life. Wisdom begins with humble dependence on God, realizing we are not righteous by ourselves, we are made righteous by Christ's work. And true wisdom doesn't start with techniques or habits, it starts with God's work in us. We'll get to that later when unpack the verse over children, but we can teach them and they can't produce in themselves a good heart. That's done by Jesus, the work that he did and does.
Yeah, so the word wisdom, it's used 125 times in the book of Proverbs. And so biblical wisdom has very little to do with your IQ or your education. Just because you score really well on tests and you did really well in school, that has very little to do with biblical wisdom. Biblical wisdom, it's a matter of moral or scriptural understanding. It has to do with someone's character or value. It means looking at things through the lens of Christ. People with wisdom, they have the skill to face life honestly and courageously and to manage successfully so that God's purposes are fulfilled in their lives.
I heard something where they said, smart people can be evil, But the wisdom and the reliance on God and trusting in His truth is what produces that true wisdom. Doesn't lead to folly and
Yeah.
destruction.
Yeah. That's good. That's a good way to apply it.
And then Proverbs presents general principles of God's providential order, not unconditional guarantees. So it's really probability, because if you trust in God, if you seek Him, probability would tell you that it's going to end up well. They're not promises where it's you do this, you get that. But
Mhm.
it does seem to lend, just like anything. If you work hard, then typically, good things happen, and there's success in life. But it calls for practical godliness in every sphere while pointing ultimately to Christ as the perfect embodiment of wisdom. This book applies wisdom to daily life, speech, work, relationships, marriage, parenting. I mean, everything. That's why it's so good. I mean, you can unpack it, you can read any of them, and I guarantee you're going to find some application to your daily life.
You talk about reading that chapter a day. It's cool because it's not broken up into every chapter is about a specific topic, right? Like you're hitting lots of different things in there. There's no rhyme or reason. And I think that's great because, you're talking about reading through it one chapter every day and you'll read it in a month. Well, you go back and you read it again, and because you're in a different place that next month than you were the last time that you read that chapter, because it's not all grouped in the same topic. I have found that sometimes things that didn't hit as hard month one, you're finding different verses within that chapter. So I feel like I get a lot more out of Proverbs because it does kind of have different topics throughout each chapter.
Yeah, 100%. After some years of being a Christian, you don't really see or read anything new, but you just have a new way of understanding it, a deeper wisdom, a deeper knowledge to
Mhm.
the truth. But and we grow in that wisdom with union in Christ by the Holy Spirit, not by our just human effort. And then obedience is the fruit, not the root, that spending time in God's word will produce.
So I read this quote from a Spanish novelist, Cervantes, and it defines a proverb as a short sentence based on a long experience. And I really love that because
Yeah, that's
it,
good.
it's it's so true. So many of the things when you live through them, when it's something that has impacted you day after day, week after week, month after month, and then you look back and you can pick out the highlights of that experience and combine it into such a short sentence. It really is something that Solomon, being the wisest man to ever live and having written so much of this, it's like, man, why not learn from the highlights that he has from the different seasons of his life that he's pulled out?
Yeah. It's like looking at others not judgmentally, but if you look across the street and your neighbor has weeds in their yard and their roof's falling apart, and you see a lot of the neglect, you can, tell your kids, hey, that's what happens over time if you don't, address something, and you can learn a lot from other people's experience without having to repeat the the bad things.
Well, that's just a quick overview of the things that you're going to be able to take away. And so now we're going to get into just a couple of proverbs that Brennan and I each have really gotten a lot out of. And like I said, it's so great because I've read Proverbs before, and I don't know that necessarily the three that I picked out for this week would have been the three that I picked out 6 months ago. Just depending on the stage of life and the season of life that you're in, there's different things that you're going to get out of it. So for me, the first one was Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. This is something that Brennan, you and I have been talking about, just your friend group and how much that impacts you. There was a quote from the Live Free podcast with Josh Howerton that you and I both reference quite often. He said, "Show me your group chat, I'll show you your future." It was just a modern day way of saying that your friends are going to dictate the direction of your life. He said, "It's impossible for you to live the right life with the wrong friends, but it is nearly impossible to live the wrong life with the right friends." And so we've got a graphic here that we're going to throw up on the screen, and it is the three circles of friendship. And so with this, you've got three different circles. The outer circle is your care circle. And so that is going to be everyone in your life that you're friends with, your acquaintances, those people that if they reached out to you needing help, they shoot out a text, hey, need help with X, Y, or Z, anybody available, that if you've got the time and the ability, you're going to be like, yeah, hey man, we'll be honored to help you out with that. No problem. And so that's going to be your care circle. The circle inside of that is your influence, right? And so Jesus had his 12 disciples. Those would have been the people that were in his circle of influence. They're the people that you're influencing because you've got a little bit more personal relationship with them. It's the people that when you get together, you already know a little bit about their life. They know about your life. You're just catching up on what's new, but you know the history, you know what's been going on, the struggles that they've gone through. It's your closer friends, it's your neighbors, it's your people that you work with, it's the people that you see on a more regular basis that they're going to have a little bit of influence in your life. You're going to have a little bit of influence on their life, but they're not your go-to people. When it really hits the fan and you're having big life issues, they're not the immediate people that you're going to. That is your intimacy circle, right? So that's your three or four people. You know, Jesus had Peter, James, and John that were in his inner circle. So Jesus had his three people. Those are your ride or dies. Those are your 3 a.m. phone calls when it's going down. Who are the people that you're calling to really help you with that? Those three or four people that are in your intimacy circle. I've heard preachers talk about who are a combination of those three or four people because they're the people that you're seeking advice from. They're the people that you're doing life with. They're the people that are holding you accountable. And so when we when we talk about those three or four people, it's very important who those three or four people are. And one of the things that Josh Howerton talks about is a lot of times when people start getting serious for Christ, it oftentimes requires a radical amputation. And more often than not, he said, you know, that radical amputation is going to be a relationship. It's not that you're cutting them out completely and they're dead to you and they're blacklisted and you're never talking to them again, but it's moving them from that intimacy circle to either the influence or care circle. And it's one of those things, it's really hard to do because we have friends that we've had for years, and just because you've known them for a long time, if they're not one of the friends that's pulling you closer to God, that you may just move into that influence circle, that you may have to move them to the care circle. So definitely something to be thinking about is, you know, who is in that intimacy circle, because they are really going to shape the direction that your life is going to go.
Looking back, and that makes me think about friends I've had in seasons, and even good friends, but sometimes they go that direction, we go a different direction, but still followers in Christ and everything. But how they've impacted me and how that carries forward to even now. So definitely want to be thinking about who's in your inner circle. My verse is Proverbs 22:6, and that's train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Since I'm in that stage of life, there's also some comfort there in knowing that it's not all up to me. It's Jesus who gives them a new heart. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But the formation of a child, they're either going in one of two directions, either towards wisdom or folly and destruction. And so we can help guide them. And I think our role as parents, what I'm coming to understand, and most of the topics here, it's not a, hey, I'm doing this, perfectly. You guys should do like me. Most of this was just complete, wow, I need to be doing better. So when I researched this verse and looked at the commentaries and looked at other pastors preaching about it, it was really convicting. And so all of this is just, it's for me, it's for you guys. We're all in the same boat. You guys are probably ahead of me, but I heard something, and it was a lot of times for us with the younger kids, it was deciding, are we going to homeschool? Are we going to put them in this public school? Are we going to put them in a private school, a charter school, or, whatever, right? And something I heard when I was looking into this verse was, as Christian parents, we're all homeschooling, regardless of where you send your kid to learn about math and science and everything. When they come home, you're homeschooling. It's not someone else's job to instruct them, and then when they come home, you're just basically feeding them and sending them to bed. There's still a whole Christian discipling and helping them see the world through Christ's eyes and what he wants from us in that aspect. So I like that. I'm going to, instead of saying, should we homeschool the kids or not, next time I get presented with that question or the topic of homeschooling comes up, we're all homeschooling. I really like that phrase. It's important to remember that children are a blessing and not a burden. And a lot of times in those younger years, it's you just want them to be, your friends and your buddies and, take them hunting with you or something, but they aren't quite there yet. You got to get them to that phase. And so in those early years, it's just teaching them the ways, but also just trying to help them survive. And there's a lot of stress that comes in those years is what I'm finding. But
Yeah.
every family is going to orbit around a center. And so is that center money? Is it sports? If you're putting them in those traveling sports, it's not a sin. But man, I mean that's your money and your time, and we don't do that because we've seen just the time commitment and what that pulls you away from. And more times than not, if you're doing that traveling baseball, you're missing Sunday church. So it's definitely something we decided not to do. But no conviction for you guys that do. Is just keep that in mind that if that's the center, you got to pull God at the center and find other ways around it to get your kids to church and show
So
them the importance of that.
so I was one of the kids that was playing the travel ball, man. Like summer hit and we were playing 100, 110, 120 games in a summer. There'd be times we're playing in two tournaments on the same weekend, having to drive from ballpark to ballpark. But one thing that we did try to do is because it's crazy because baseball, you play your games on Friday evenings all day Saturday, but for some reason they can never get that championship game or the semifinals and finals. It's always got to be on Sunday. But so what we would do is my dad and I, we would find whatever city, town we were in. We would try to just find a little local Baptist church or something like that. And we would go. Now I'd be in full uniform. My dad's a coach. He's in uniform as well. So, we'd sneak in, sit in the back row, but we would get our time with God in on the Sunday. So there are ways that even if that is the season that you're in, think about ways that you can incorporate God into that because it can be done.
Man, that's an awesome example. And the church we go to, they even have a service on Thursdays, and so there's
Mhm.
other days if you can't make a Sunday or whatever. But yeah, that's really cool. To that point, it shows that your dad made that a priority, and maybe something along those lines stuck with you, and
Mhm.
you've certainly been carrying it out. So.
Yeah.
But I see that a lot is a lot of parents just don't make that time because it's one other thing to do. And then another phrase I landed on along with the homeschooling was the connect before you correct. And man, that's a hard one because most of the time you see something wrong, and so instead of taking that time to connect on the heart level, because you're not wanting to control behavior, you're wanting them to see things through the lens of God, and it's a lot easier for someone to do good and not act bad if they love you and they have a strong relationship with you. That's like you and I have such a strong relationship. Everything I do, I try to do in a sense of like being a good friend versus if it's an acquaintance or someone that I don't really care for, you don't get that same level. And so if it's coming out of fear and they just do stuff because they're afraid of getting in trouble or something, that's not a good approach either. It's definitely connecting to them. And then the way I see that is it's going to have long-term effects. So when they get older, you're not so much a boss at that point, you're like a consultant. And that's why I have such a good relationship with my parents. It's because they were always connecting on the heart level. There was never a fear-based system where now I come to them and it's kind of like, hey, what would you do in this situation? And so I want to reproduce that best I can with our kids. The final thing I have is, again, that we parent them, we teach them, we show them the word, we get them to church, but it's ultimately Jesus who gives them a new heart. And so we're just praying and waiting for that day, having faith in Jesus that he'll accomplish that work.
That's really good to think about because I think about that when I think about witnessing, but that's essentially what you're doing with your kid.
Yeah, that's good.
So my second one was Proverbs 14:23. In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. So toil is long, strenuous, fatiguing labor. So substitute that all strenuous, fatiguing labor. That mere talk tends only to poverty. It goes back to the whole don't just talk the talk, walk the walk. We've all heard that, and it requires actual exertion, not just wishful thinking or verbal desire. And I think we can all think back to a time where there was the reward of doing something hard, long, and strenuous. For me, it was the Marine Corps going through boot camp, man. That's 13 weeks of just absolute brutal torture. And here I am 15 years later, and I can still remember the day that I graduated boot camp. I can remember the day that they handed me my Eagle Globe and Anchor on the grinder after the Crucible. And so I think the longer that you struggle, the greater the reward. And this life of Christianity, it's it is a lifelong struggle. I don't know if you run into this, but people sometimes think that become a Christian for the easy life. You think, oh, I'm going to become a Christian and things are going to get easier. But then when you really get into it and learn what it means to be a Christian and what that life looks like, and that the path to hell is wide and easy, the path to heaven is narrow, and you realize that it's not a easy button. It's going to require long, hard, strenuous work. And if you're actually living the life, if you're doing the things that the Bible commands you to do, it is going to be hard. But the longer the struggle, the greater the reward. So a lifelong struggle is going to lead to an eternal reward. And so that was just something this week that I thought about and really have been trying to just keep my mind on.
100%, because it's there's the, as a Christian, and knowing what Jesus has done for us, there's that resting in him in the sense of like parenting. And so it's not all up for you in the sense of like doing hard work to make sure your kids achieve faith and they turn out good. There's resting in knowing that Jesus will accomplish what he set out to do. And so you can rest in that. But the hard part is just having that faith and knowing that we long for the day where we're glorified, we're taken into heaven, we're made new. But the hard part is what we may have to give up on this earth that may seem like a cost in the short term, whether that's fame, fortune, what we think is fun in terms of sin, and just adhering to the culture and the worldly standards. But like you said, what comes at the end is so much greater than anything we can imagine here on earth. That's why Paul says it's not a loss.
Mm-hmm.
We can always point to Ecclesiastes with, Solomon. No, we're not going to be richer. We're not going to have more women. We're not going to have, more wisdom than him. And he got to the end of that road and played it all out and said, "Hey, there's nothing here." So
Yeah.
just knowing Christ, there is no loss, in terms of this, what the world has to offer. It's all gain.
Yeah.
But longing for that day. Now, I feel like on this next verse, I stole it from you before you had a chance to write it down, because we're always talking about this. You're always mentioning this verse, but it's Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. So from A Daunted Life, we have Kyle Thompson, and the way he's described it is the Hebrew word translated man uses language tied to face, which also refers to the edge of a blade or axe. And the sharpening of those blades is very violent, it's loud, and sometimes that's what it's going to be when you get in a good group of men that are going to, call you out and call you to a higher standard. And that's what you want. You don't want those friends that are, just always sitting around every single night, drinking beer, and the bar is so low that there is no standard. And so back to the circle of friends, make sure you have that tight
Absolutely.
circle, that you have people that you can actually count on and they can call you up. But
Seeing someone that is going to challenge you because they're living the right life, that's definitely something that when I was thinking about my intimacy circle, it was okay, who are the men in my life that I'm like, dang, when I get to that age, I want my life to look like that.
yeah, and just a good standard to make is, speaking of Undaunted Life. So every year he comes out with so many ways to avoid being a crappy man, and he comes out with them each year, whatever. But that's something I wrote down, I think January 1st when he released it, but I kind of forgot about it. It was a busy month for both of us. But I have that on the note, and I think it'll come into play when we talk about the challenge. But yeah, look that up and set that as your new standard.
We'll throw a link in
Yeah.
the show notes so they can start checking him out.
But yeah, then just the final point is we got proximity to godly men does not automatically produce godliness. So that if you're surrounded by godly men, they're going to certainly influence you and build you up and call you out and keep you at that higher standard, but they can't save you. That's Christ's work alone. But we also can't be lone wolf Christians. Someone like me, it's easy to just silo off and kind of have that desire, just be left alone, just kind of work. And I like that grunt work, I'm in cybersecurity and I like to just grind away versus lead in the traditional sense of being a manager or something. I just like to get my hands dirty and do all the technical stuff. That's just my default state, I guess. And so coming along with Jeff, meeting other guys, and we talked about the first episode, which was pretty rough, but in those early days, a couple years ago with the D group and those guys and how they influenced me. And
Mhm.
I think back, and if I never joined that group with those men, I don't think I would be where I'm at now. It's not like I would be in the world and I wouldn't have faith, but my faith wouldn't be as strong. Not that they produced a stronger faith in me, but they exposed me to how to understand the word, how to unpack it, a different way to strengthen that relationship with Christ. And so sometimes if you're like an introvert like me, it takes stepping out and joining better men through that process. But men sharpen one another only as they submit together to Christ, who alone is the standard and source of true wisdom and growth. So, important reminder as we're looking to point to human men as our mentors and people like that. Ultimately, we're looking to Christ.
That reminds me of the Joby Martin quote: the three most dangerous words in the human language are, I got this. And
Mm,
so oftentimes I'm like you. I like to do my work and only have to rely on myself. But one of the topics that I do want to cover in the near future and that we've got on our topics list is church and what is church. So oftentimes we think of it as a building. It's these four walls that you go to. But the church is the people, it's the fellowship, it's the community of Christians. And so you don't have to go to a building every single week, but at the same time, you can't be off on your own trying to, like you said, lone wolf it. You do have to come together with a group of Christians and you have to grow in Christ together because it's real easy, I know for me, to think that because I've read my Bible every day this week, man, I'm just killing the Christian life. But there's a million other things that I'm falling short on loving my wife and treating my wife as Christ treats the church. And if I don't have Brennan to sit here and call me out and say, hey man, how's things going at home? How's everything with the wife? If I don't have that, then it's going to be real easy for me to just look at myself. We don't like to resonate and think about the things that we're not doing well. And so having those men to call you out and to ask you the tough questions is really important. All right, so my third and final one is Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. So I'm sure if my wife was here listening to this, she would just be amen, hand to the sky, because I'm an ideas guy. I've got a million ideas, and I can tell you, I am an idiot. I think that most of us men are. We think we know what's best for us. Again, I just think as a man, my instinct is to revert to the I got this mentality. And I get myself into trouble when I just start going off on my own, thinking Jeff knows what's best in my personal life, in my work life. So, one of the things that I have begun doing is when I pray, I used to pray that God would come alongside and that God would be with me in my plan. I'm asking God to join my plan. So oftentimes these plans are not the right plan. So what I have begun praying is that God will align my heart to his will, and then my plan will already be God's will. He will already be there from the beginning. I don't need to ask God to join my plan because my plan is wrapped around what God's will is. And I think that has helped kind of get me to turn this corner about thinking about what Jeff wants. And it's more, okay, what does God want for me? And so that's one thing that I'm really focusing on. And I'm brand new to this. We've talked about this podcast is speaking
yeah.
directly to us because I need this more than anyone else that's going to see this episode. It's one of those things, though, that when I continue to pray this, when I pray this every day, I do feel like God is leading me in the direction that He wants me to go. And I'm not resisting. I'm not trying to, course correct and steer the other way because God's putting on my heart things that are already building up his kingdom. And so that's one thing I would encourage people to try doing. And I think that you'll see when God is in the plan from the beginning, when God is the creator of the plan and my heart is just going along with him, man, one, the satisfaction that you get from that is infinitely more than building a business and making a lot of money. So oftentimes we use those as the way we tell if we're succeeding or not. But when I have a conversation with one of the seventh grade boys and I see his eyes light up and it kind of clicks and all that. It wasn't my plan initially to be the leader of a seventh grade boys youth group, but I get a lot more satisfaction out of doing that on Wednesday nights than I would spending an extra 12 hours on Wednesday working to build the business to make a little bit more money. And so it's one thing I would encourage people to do. It's one thing that I've done that has really made a big difference for me.
That's good. That's it's not just you, because I mean, I was I heard that earlier, and it was basically like instead of praying after the fact, like you've already made a decision, you're already going down the road, then you pray beforehand. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense because I think guys like us or just guys in general, usually we get something in our head. I don't know if it's ADHD or what, but we get this one track mind and we get it all planned out and we're just moving forward with it. And then we start praying, right? And so then we're like, God, come alongside and let's bring this thing to completion. And that may not have been
Mhm.
his plan at all. And I've done that multiple times. And I can point back and look at my career, marriage, I mean, everything. If I would have done it a different way, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. But this was God's plan. I can point back and see all the little steps that He was doing, and I just had to get out of the way. And it's not an effortless moment. You have to put in that effort and that time, but just making sure you're aligning with God's will. And exactly what you said, pray along those lines and just make sure you do that. But yeah, that's good. And I apologize. I feel like I transitioned into a guy mode, got my buddy Jeff and, think about the inner circle, but there's ladies that listen to this podcast. It's not a solely men's podcast. And a lot of times I frame it that way, but a little convicting now as I move into my verse, which is Proverbs 18:22. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Again, there are no lone wolf Christians. God's design in creation was that man should not be alone. A wife is a gracious blessing from the Lord, just like the children. Marriage is a means of God's favor when received in godliness, yet singleness is no lesser state, both to glorify God when lived in faithful submission to Him. A husband's calling is stewardship, not entitlement. Receiving his wife is a gift of grace and leading with sacrificial, Christ shaped love. So I think the super convicting part about it and just understanding how much love God has for me is we've been married close to 8 years now, and we didn't do things right in the beginning and not according to God's plan, but He worked it all out with us, repenting, coming to Him, and then just spending time in the Word. He redeemed our relationship and our marriage, and it's amazing to see that. And what I have as a gift from God is a wife who is submissive to me, but not just a robot. We have that relationship where I submit to God and then she submits to me, but it's a hierarchical system where I don't feel entitled. She's not my servant. I'm not demanding things of her without getting her feedback. But ultimately, she does look to me, and that has developed out of trust. And that trust was developed from us both submitting to God and realizing that we were at fault. And then He's corrected it, and He loves us. And I don't deserve what I have, but what I got out of it is a best friend. We shoot guns together. We share in the good times and bad times of raising kids. We're best friends. We don't have a lot of time in general, just with the kids, life, work, all that kind of stuff. And so the fact that we actually enjoy spending time together, it's just truly a blessing from God. And that can make all the difference. I could not imagine going through this life, doing that lone wolf thing without her by my side. And it's truly amazing. And I'm not simping to her or anything. She's not even going to listen to this podcast. So this is all just it's just in my heart. It's the
Yeah.
same thing you get from an awesome friendship and just seeing what God has done when you put your trust in Him and align your will to Him. And even if you make mistakes along the way, He's loving, He's caring, He'll help lead you. And then trusting in Him and following His path is definitely the way to peace and joy in this life.
Yeah, that's so great. I'm in this phase of my life where it is just me and the wife. We don't have kids yet. And before my wife and I met, I had been single for 7 years. And when I say single, I'm talking not dating, anything. I was working on my business. I was building the business. I was solely focused on that. And I couldn't understand how all my friends were married. And I'm like, that just seems horrible. Like, why would I want to do that? They're sitting there and it's like, hey, we want to go do something. And they're like, yeah, let me check with the wife real quick, make sure we don't have plans or I haven't forgotten about anything. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, dude, I get to do what I want when I want. I don't have to check with anybody. And man, I'll tell you what, God's plan is greater than my own. But man, the guys that have been married for a long period of time and guys like you that have the relationship with your wives, it's like, man, I can't wait to get to the point that my wife and I have those years behind us and we've got all that. Because it really is, it's one of those things. I don't know about you. I love hanging out with you. I love talking to you, but my idea of fun with you is not sitting on the couch. But guess what? I love sitting on the couch with my wife, just sitting there talking, laughing, connecting. And it's been something that it's just so different. But yeah, I'm super blessed being in a wheelchair. There's a lot of things that come with that life. And so for my wife to just have jumped in both feet and having seen some of the difficulties, I mean, part of the reason we've had to delay this podcast is the amount of pain that I've been in the last few weeks. And she just jumps in and doesn't ask what needs to be done, just sees what needs to be done, what I need help with, and does it. And it's definitely something that God brought me the woman that I needed and one that could put up with all the crap that comes with just me as a person in general, but also the life of being in a wheelchair because it's not easy and there's a lot of sacrifices of things that she wants to do and she doesn't get weighted on hand and foot like a lot of women probably do. It's not just I can hop out of bed real quick and go grab something for her. And so it's one of those things that finding the right woman is absolutely incredible, but it is kind of like what you're saying though, is there is an importance to that woman being a Christian because otherwise there is going to be a struggle. There is going to be we both want to be in charge. There's going to be a little bit more friction there if you're trying to live the Christian life and she's not understanding or agreeing with it. And my wife was not a Christian before we met. She was raised Catholic and had done that whole Catholic growing up and going to PSR, whatever they call it. And, but then after that, that was the end of it and hadn't really spent a whole lot of time in church and all that. And when I see her reading her Bible or praying or hear her talk about God and or ask questions, man, there is something just so attractive about that I can't even put it into words because it's just a different type of attraction. And so I love that you put that one in there. And if my wife watches it, I'll probably get smacked on the back of the head because I didn't put it in there. But I'll say you stole that one from me. I'll edit
There you
that part
go.
out and I'll just say, oh, you stole that one from me, Brennan. I was going to put that in there. But no, I
The good
completely
or
agree.
the good or the bad thing is the wives won't be watching.
No,
They love us. This is not their thing though.
they love us, but they hear this on a daily basis. They don't need to spend their entertainment time listening to us as well. I mean,
I think I think that's a good button on it.
all right. Well, we'll jump into a somewhat current event. Like I said, unfortunately, the last couple of weeks have been busy, and I've had to delay because of some pain issues, but we're going to talk a little bit about the fraud in Minnesota that has been taking place, and we're going to tie it back to the Bible. Brennan, have you seen the full 42-minute Nick Shirley video on X?
I got the highlights, and for these current event news segments, this is definitely your wheelhouse. And then I'll just interject, but man, talking about this January, it's been a mess in the news cycle. And for me, it's just like there's so much coming at me. I don't know if we're made to process it all or supposed to process it all, but it's certainly things are out of whack. It seems all related to authority, either submitting to it, too much, or not submitting it at all. And
Mhm.
um, scary place. Could you summarize it for people like me and generally what happened?
So this Nick Shirley video, they're going through the Somali fraud. They're estimating that in Minnesota alone, it's $9 billion in fraud. And it's just crazy that people are out there protesting and all that. They're getting upset about it. We read in Exodus 20:15, it's the eighth commandment, you shall not steal. Well, fraud is theft. Proverbs 29:24, the partner of a thief hates his own life. He hears the curse but discloses nothing. And so my question to you, Brennan, is could we be seeing that this whole Somalian fraud scheme, is these people reaping the curse of helping people pull off billions in theft? Because I think we can all agree that it's probably not the individuals that we're seeing in this video that mastermind this 9 billion in theft. I think there's definitely people behind the scenes that we're not seeing, but unfortunately, because they've been willing to go along with it, and like it says, the partner of the thief hates his own life and hears the curse but discloses nothing. They didn't bring it to anyone's attention. They didn't tell anybody that it was happening. They were the partner in this, but I think we're starting to see now the Bible is not just something that happened, thousands and thousands of years ago. We can see it playing out in everyday life. And in my opinion, we're starting to see that, unfortunately, there are people that are going to start being held accountable for this. And I think that, it points right back to that verse.
Was it this guy that just brought it all out,
Yeah, so Nick
that drew
Shirley,
attention to it?
Yeah, so Nick Shirley's a YouTuber, a young kid. I think he's 23. Goes around and just goes, he's been down to the border. He's been down to South America to some of these prisons. He just goes to kind of hotspot locations and interviews people there, talks to people there, and has amassed quite a following on YouTube. Well, there was a guy that reached out to him and said, "Hey, I've got the receipts for billions and billions of dollars of fraud that's taking place in Minnesota." This is a local guy, lives in Minnesota. And so Nick Shirley goes and he fact checks, and yeah, this guy's got all the receipts. He's got paperwork from the government talking about how much money has been given. And so what it is it all revolves around these non-medical transportation companies. So in Minnesota, there are 1,020 non-medical transportation companies. 800 of them are owned by Somalians. And so in this video, he goes around to all of these locations because when they file their business paperwork, they have to put an address of the business. Well, some of these businesses, some of these transportation companies are located in liquor stores, check cashing facilities, post office box stores. And he goes in and he's like, "Hey, we're looking for X, Y, and Z transportation company." And they're like, "It's not here. We don't know anything about it." But it's registered at that location. And what they're seeing is in one day, the few handful of locations that he went to, it started with transportation companies, but then it went into these daycares and these childcare facilities. And in one day, he went to a handful of companies. And in one day, they were able to prove that there was $110 million in fraud that had taken place because these daycare companies were representing that they were anywhere from 20 to 50 to 150 kids, and these are all government subsidized companies. So they're providing childcare, but they're getting money from the government for these childcare facilities, and they're showing that there's no kids going in and out of these facilities. It was the middle of the day, multiple days that they went through, and not a single kid went in or out. And they're looking back, and this guy that is local to Minnesota, he's like, "I've got photographs from these transportation companies where he can, they're timestamp photos, and he's showing that these vehicles that are registered to these transportation companies aren't moving." And he goes into it a lot more in detail and all that, but basically it's these transportation companies, it's these daycares that it's just completely fraudulent businesses that over the last few years have collected billions of dollars in government subsidy for services that they're not rendering, daycares that don't have children in it, these transportation companies that some of these transportation companies, like I said, one of these transportation companies is registered to a liquor store that doesn't even have a parking lot. It's just got curbside parking. So they're like, where are the vehicles? It said that there's 20 or 25 vehicles registered to this business, and they're doing X amount of rides per day, and they're getting X amount of dollars per ride, but there's no vehicles there. There's nowhere to park the vehicles. It's registered to liquor stores, post office, box stores. And so it's just very clearly fraudulent. And then he goes around and he's interviewing just random people that he's walking up to on the street. And everybody is in the know about this, but nobody's done anything until this guy comes out and he does all this, puts it online. And the video he posted on X has 141 million views in a month, which is just crazy. We're going to get like 10 views on this podcast. So anyway, so that's kind of the highlights of the Minneapolis.
If I put the cybersecurity hat on in terms of risk and auditing, in one day, a 23-year-old kid came into town, uncovered one of the biggest fraudulent cases probably ever. Mm-hmm. So either there is the worst internal audit team for the government ever, or there's no audit team. Which is, I think the big takeaway there.
Well, and he said that since this video has come out, he has said that there are people that are reaching out that say he needs to come to California, that they have the receipts from California, and that the California fraud eclipses this massively. Yeah. So he's thinking about doing that. But I find it interesting, right? So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the ICE shootings. And then I kind of want to jump back to this timeline, right? So the ICE shootings has been a big thing. There have been two. And so here's a verse that we're going to use is 1 Peter 1:13 through 16. So the ICE shootings, right? I don't know if you're up to date on these, but basically
I'm more familiar with these. Yeah.
Yeah, so these protesters, and I'm going to use the word protesters very loosely in quotations. It's definitely not a peaceful protest, but there have been two protesters that have been shot by ICE agents, and it's absolutely insane that people are backing what these protesters are doing, because they're clearly breaking the law. They are clearly being violent, and yet there's massive support for them. And so we read in 1 Peter 1:13 through 16. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be the emperor as supreme or the governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants for God. Whether it's the emperor as supreme or the governors as sent by him, right? So whether it's the president of the United States or these ICE officers that are sent by the government to do this. And the large majority of the people that these ICE officers are arresting are violent criminals. On the Live Free podcast, Josh Howerton talks about two things can be simultaneously true. One, it is a tragedy anytime someone dies. But two, it's the actions of these people that resulted in that tragedy. And so by inserting yourself into the situation, you're causing chaos. And so I think that verse from 1 Peter is just perfectly aligned with what is going on today.
I think that's the big takeaway, though. Two things can be true at the exact same time. And so it's all this division that these kind of things create. And I'm getting a little tired of just politics in general, just with the latest news thing, it's more division. But ultimately you realize if you go all the way to the top, both sides are corrupt because people are corrupt. And when Absolutely. You put your focus on power and fortune and winning and not on Christ, why in the world are we choosing either side? If neither side is choosing ultimately Christ as their center of their life that we talked about earlier. What's the center of your life? And so being on team A or B is not the point if neither is on team Jesus.
Exactly.
So I think that's my takeaway with all these things. And the more division we have, I think if we strip it down, you got two sides, right? So you go to the left, and you got Jimmy Kimmel talking about these events. You go to the right, and you got Fox News or whoever talking about it. If they would stop dividing, we would agree on the central main points. But that's not their goal. Their goal is division on both sides. So it's just sad that we can't recognize the two things being true, come together, and hey, how do we fix this?
Hmm.
Because you can also follow your laws and come into the country legally,
Hmm.
and also love your neighbor,
Yep.
and want them to come in. And it's just sad that it's more division on a country that's already divided.
This next little piece, I'll go through it real quick. I enjoy a good conspiracy here and there. We're going to talk about conspiracy theories at some point on this show, but I just want to throw this out there. And Brennan, if you don't want to be associated with this, we'll just cut this part of the podcast out. So, timeline. Nick Shirley's video on X comes out December 26th. In 1 month, it gets 141 million views. The Renee Good shooting, which was the first ICE shooting, happens January 7th. So shortly after, the Renee Good GoFundMe starts. And by the end of her GoFundMe, there has been $1.5 million raised that is all going to be donated to her family. The Sean Ryan Show, he interviews Nick Shirley the day after the shooting on January 8th. It's released. 1.4 million views in 2 weeks. It's one of his largest videos that he's released. January 24th, so just a few weeks later, Alex Preddy is shot. To date, since January 24th, and we are sitting here February 3rd, his GoFundMe has reached $1.8 million that is going to go to his family. Here's my question. We're seeing these billions and billions and billions of dollars that are being funneled out of Minnesota. Where are all of these incidents happening? Where's the only place that is getting violent with these ICE protests? Minnesota. Is there a financial piece to these shootings? Are these people being told that if you go out there and create all this chaos and something does happen, we'll take care of your family? Is there a financial incentive? There's all kinds of people that have been linked to the Minnesota government that are helping with these groups in Minnesota that are violently protesting. There's been a huge pivot to these shootings as opposed to all of the spotlight being on the fraud. Are people that are committing this fraud that have these billions and billions of dollars now, are they promoting a financial incentive? We've seen since the whole BLM riots, I think we've been aware that there are professional protesters that are out there. And the question has always been, who's funding this? Well, in my opinion, I think we might have started to see where some of this funding is coming from, because $9 billion is a lot of money. And when you're paying these people, they know that if something bad does happen, that their family's taken care of through these GoFundMe's. For some people, there might not be a downside. So anyway, conspiracy theory out there to the
I know.
universe.
Where's our? We didn't put our tinfoil hats on.
Right, right,
No,
exactly.
I think you either put your tinfoil hat on or you put your blinders on, and it's one of the two. And I haven't unpacked it or thought about it that deeply, but there's a playbook where the people run it, and it's not a peaceful protest. The whole goal of it is to get a rise out of it, and then that fallout is what you make public and big, and you blow it up and you cause division. And so I don't think that is conspiracy at all. And so if that's the end goal, they're achieving that. And it's hard for me to follow the news because, one, I can't change it. I mean, I vote, but it doesn't enter my general thought process for very long, because I can't sit there with it because I can't do anything about it in some sense, right? And
Right.
so I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I'm not blind to it. And so I see what's happening, and it just seems like one big thing is covering up the next big thing. And when
Mhm.
everything seems linked, it seems like, yeah, I guess things could just be cause effect in this one general area. But yeah, going all the way back to the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, and all the way, you see these things play out, and it seems very coordinated, and it seems chaotic. And so I think we just see the same playbook run over and over again. I always go back to new days, same demons. It's the same thing that we've seen the entire life.
Yeah.
It's disappointing to see all this division that happens, and then the cycle just repeats, and then people are just missing the main point. And then it's like when somebody, like going all the way back to when Jelly Roll, presented Jesus Christ, they talk about it as it's something that's for old people and it's something they don't want to touch, but they're not realizing that the whole solution is right there. We talk about the journey of being a Christian is a narrow road. But the whole thing is to get on the road, putting the faith in Christ. He makes it fairly easy in the sense of you have to give up these worldly things, but what you gain in return. But if you're blind to it, Christ hasn't given them that sight and that new heart yet. It's hard to point them in that direction. But that's my prayer, is that some of these people will turn. And I've seen that. I guess the encouraging thing is when we look at all these bad stories, I have seen some unexpected people make a turn to Christianity. And just to see God moving through all this chaos,
Yeah.
and that final hope is in Him. That's the encouraging part to focus on as Christians. Because if you only focus and stay in the news, it's a pretty scary place, and
Yeah.
that's also the design. Is they want to instill this fear
Mm-hmm.
and this they want you to rely on the government and as the source, and then they want to point out one side of the government as being the problem when really it's just collectively as a whole
Mm-hmm.
very problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well,
That's my rant on it.
tinfoil hat coming off. Let's jump back. And Brennan,
Yeah.
what do we have for the verse memorization for this week?
How to get some wisdom, talking about all this folly and sin, and let's point back to Christ. But it's certainly that fear, that reverence that we talked about earlier. And it's Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction.
That's really good. I think that, we kind of came full circle on this. We started there at the beginning, and that's, the overview of Proverbs. So I think that's a great, great proverb to start on. So yeah, so challenge everybody. It's not a long one. So for guys like me, a little easier to stomach having to only memorize a few words. But that's not gonna be your only challenge this week, guys. We've talked about every week that there's a challenge that comes along with it. So this week is not going to be physically demanding. We're not taking cold showers. I think we're all over and done with that as we come out of this most recent ice storm. I think we've all had enough cold. So this week the challenge is going to be that circle of friendship that we talked about. So that graphic that we put up on the screen, we're going to have a link to that in the show notes. It's going to take you to the website where you can print out that circle of friendship. The challenge this week, guys, is going to be print that out, fill it out, and then hang it somewhere private, somewhere where you're going to see it. It's not on the fridge where everybody's looking at it. Maybe it's your closet, maybe it's your office, but somewhere private, but somewhere where you are going to see it. And don't just grab it and fill it out right away. Really start thinking about it, pray about it, and figure out who it is that's going to be inside of that intimacy circle, who's inside the influence circle, and who's inside your care circle. And really just focus on that, because I think that if we can get this part right, myself included, that if I can surround myself with the friends that are pointing me in the right direction, that we're going to see a big change in our lives. So that's going to be our challenge with you guys. And then once you fill that out, that's the easy part. Start meeting with these intimacy people. Start meeting with them once a week, even if it's just Zoom. Brent and I, we hop on this call and we talk a little bit before the podcast gets started. One of my buddies meeting just through Zoom every Saturday morning. Some of us were meeting at church or at Starbucks or something like that. If time allows, it's great meeting in person, but fortunately we live in a time where we have the abilities through FaceTime and Zoom and all that we can meet remotely. So that's going to be our challenge. Get started with it. And I think that you're going to see a huge change in your lives very quickly if you start surrounding yourself with the right people. So Brennan, that's the challenge for the week.
That's good. It's awesome.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in this week. Go ahead, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Get on there, get on the show notes on the website. print them out. Don't just take our word for it. You're going to be able to see the verses that we pulled and see where it is that we're talking about. We try not to give opinion on this. We're just trying to come at it from what does the Bible say. And so we want you guys to be able to see where we're pulling all of our thoughts from. And you can find that on the show notes in the description. So, Brennan, thanks for taking the time this week, and I look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, great talking to you. Catch y'all next week.
All right, see you guys.